All right, today we're diving into one of the most ambitious ideas we have ever covered. We're talking about a framework that claims to unite, well, pretty much the entire universe. And I don't just mean physics, I mean philosophy, logic, and the very nature of truth itself, all stemming from one single set of principles. It's a huge claim, trying to build a bridge between the cosmos and consciousness. So let's jump in and explore the logic behind it all. So, where does this whole thing begin? It all starts with a question that has been haunting physicists for the better part of a century. You see, we have these two incredibly successful theories that describe our universe, but here's the kicker. They fundamentally disagree on how it all works. And this isn't some small, nerdy disagreement. We're talking about a deep, foundational crack in our understanding of reality itself. On one side of this crack, you've got Einstein's general relativity. This is the physics of the very, very large. Planets, stars, galaxies, the whole cosmic dance. It describes a universe that's smooth, continuous, and predictable, where gravity is just the elegant curving of space-time. But then, on the other side, you've got quantum mechanics. This is the physics of the very, very small. And it describes a world that is jumpy, pixelated, based on probabilities, and let's be honest, it's just plain weird.
And that brings us to our first section. A crack in physics. Because what we're really dealing with here is the problem of having two different universes with two different sets of rules.
Let's really break down where these two titans of physics clash. Relativity, right? It sees space-time as this smooth, continuous fabric. But quantum theory says, nope. It says energy and matter come in these tiny, indivisible packets called quanta. Relativity is deterministic. You know the start, you know the end. Quantum mechanics is all about probability. You only ever know the chances of an outcome. And maybe the weirdest of all, while relativity puts a hard speed limit on the universe, quantum mechanics has this spooky action at a distance that seems to ignore that limit completely.
Now, this isn't just a theoretical headache for physicists. This conflict leads to a complete and total breakdown at the universe's most extreme points. Think about the singularity inside a black hole, or the very first moment of the Big Bang. You have an unbelievable amount of mass crammed into a space so small it's basically zero. In those places, both theories have to apply, but instead, their equations just break. They spit out nonsense like infinities. The laws of physics as we know them literally stop working.
Okay, so how do you fix a broken universe? That brings us to Section 2, the dual logic solution. The author, Saifullah Mathlouthi, proposes something radical, not just a new theory, but an entirely new language for doing physics.
So what on earth is dual logic? Well, it's a system where properties aren't fixed. Instead, they depend entirely on the mathematical context. Let's go back to that singularity in the black hole. You know, the one with the impossible zero volume that creates infinite density? Dual logic says, hold on, what if its volume is context dependent? So, when you're doing a multiplication, like calculating density, you treat its volume as 1. Boom, you get a nice finite number. But if you're doing addition, you treat its volume as 0 because its size is basically nothing. And just like that, the contradiction, it vanishes.
Now you're probably asking, how does the math know when to do that? That's where this really clever tool called an indicator function comes in. Honestly, the best way to think of them is as little mathematical light switches. They look at the situation. Are we dealing with quantum stuff or classical stuff? Are we near a black hole or out in empty space? And they literally turn the right parts of the equation on or off depending on the context.
And when you put all of these switches into practice, you get this, the DLQRL Unified Energy Equation. Now don't let all the symbols intimidate you. It's a really beautiful idea. It is one single equation that holds all the different terms for classical, relativistic, and quantum physics. And those I symbols you see? Those are the indicator functions, the little switches making sure only the correct rules are active in any given scenario. It's one set of laws that can dynamically adapt to the entire universe.
But here's the thing. If you think solving the biggest problem in modern physics is where this story ends, you are in for a huge surprise. Because the author takes this exact same logical framework, this system that's built from the ground up to eliminate contradictions, and applies it to an even bigger question: the nature of truth itself.
This quote from the author's philosophical work really captures this pivot perfectly. It's all about that universal human need for certainty, that search for a truth that's solid and absolute in a world that can often feel, well, contradictory and confusing.
And this leads us directly to the author's central philosophical idea. The argument is that just like the laws of physics must be unified and non-contradictory, so must the very nature of reality itself. The argument for an absolute truth unfolds in a few really clear logical steps. First, any claim to knowledge has to rely on logic to even make sense. Second, the most basic fundamental law of logic is the principle of non-contradiction. You know, A cannot be both A and not A at the same time. So the author argues the whole idea of relative truth, where two contradictory things can both be true, is actually illogical. Therefore, the only possibility that remains is that truth itself must be single, absolute, and totally consistent.
And once you land on that conclusion that reality is based on a single absolute truth, the logic doesn't stop. It leads you straight into the final stage of the argument, the logical necessity of a single origin for all of reality, what philosophers have called the necessary first cause.
Starting from that foundation of logic, the author then begins to deduce the necessary attributes of this first cause. It must be eternal, right? Because if it had a beginning, it would need its own cause. It has to be timeless and spaceless, existing outside of the very universe it created. It must be unchanging and immaterial, because change and physical matter are properties of our universe, not its source. And crucially, it must be singular, one, because having multiple first causes would imply limitations and, you guessed it, a contradiction.
And this all boils down to a core logical proof. Our universe is a place of constant change. Every effect has a cause. That chain of cause and effect can't go back forever. Think of it like an infinite line of dominoes. It's just logically impossible for them to start falling on their own. There must have been something that wasn't a domino to push the very first one, an unchanging, uncaused first cause.
So, having established this list of necessary attributes using pure logic, the author then uses them as a kind of final test, applying this logical filter to the belief systems we see in the world.
Applying this logical framework is presented like this. For instance, a belief that proposes a God who gets tired or regrets something would logically contradict that deduced attribute of being timeless and unchanging. Or a theology that suggests multiple gods or a divisible God would conflict with that core principle of a singular, absolute first cause. Now, this is presented not as a critique based on faith, but as a test of internal logical consistency against those principles that were deduced earlier. So after following this rigorous logical path and testing different frameworks against those attributes, the author comes to a very specific conclusion. The argument is that the description of God found in the text of the Quran is presented as being the only one that stays in full, complete logical alignment with all of those necessary attributes of an absolute, singular, and unchanging first cause.
And this leaves us with a final, absolutely massive question that really wraps up this whole journey. It's a question about the ultimate power of reason itself. Is it possible that a single, unified system of logic, one that absolutely rejects contradiction at every level, can truly provide a coherent explanation for everything, from the tiniest quantum particles all the way up to the ultimate nature of existence and its source? That is the profound challenge that this work leaves us all to think about.